Hey, just want to make this video about the Unity input system. In this first part, I'm just going to show you how I have mine set up. And then in the second part, I'm going to do a demo with a whole new, basically recreating this project. So here we have just a basic scene. We have a big cube, and then we have a big cube as a ground plane, then we have a capsule as a player. And on the capsule, we have this player input component. And then we have this input system, which is this right here. And then we have all these events or actions. And all these actions are connected to methods in this player script here. Now, all these actions are coming from the input actions right here. And so we have move, look, fire. These are the ones that come with the when you first create the asset. And then we have these that I added for some of these separate keys, so I can get different inputs. And I'll show you the script I have. And so this is the player script. It's pretty basic. It has a float for speed, rigid body, and this vector 2 for the input vector, which comes from the input system. This move is a vector 2 right here, and we get the value out of that. So that and now we have all these methods that I set up for each of those actions. So we have a move, fire, Z, X, C, and space. And you'll see that these are the same as these actions here for player. Move, fire, ZX, space, C. And these are all also set up in the component, this player input component. So we have these events, and then under player, we have the move, fire, Z, and we have the reference to this capsule. And then we have, we can select the method here. So it's on the player script, and I have the move method. So let's see it in action. And it's pretty basic, just moving it around. I can press spacebar to jump. And here's the debugs. So when I press X, gives me output X, Z, and then space and C. You'll notice that when I press Z, it only comes out once each time I press, whereas X will come up a couple different times, and I'll show you why that is in the script. So in the script here, we have the fixed update to handle the movement. And so the way that works is we get this input action callback context when we call the action. And what that does is it gives us this context which has all this information from the input system. And so what I'm getting is I'm setting this input vector, this vector 2, to the value from the context, callback context from the input action. And that'll be either a -1 and 0, or 0, 1, or 1 or 0. It's the vector 2 for the X and Y. And so up here in the fixed edit or fixed update, we have the add force to the rigid body, and we'll take the X value from the input vector, a 0 for the Y, because we're just moving in the forward and backwards and to the side. and then we'll take the y from the input vector as the z for the rigid body vector 3. Multiply that times speed, and then use a force mode and then we use force mode force. Okay, so that's the movement. The fire just debugs fire, and for the z, we have this callback context again, and you can just grab if it's the started action. So started is the phase of the action. So according to documentation, it says the interaction has been started. That is, it received some of its expected input, but is not yet complete. So this is a way to just get the input just when it gets pressed. I have the same thing on the jump too. If context.started. There's other phases. There's waiting, performed, and canceled. It's sort of like the ending of the press, and if it's still held down. And the other ones are pretty straightforward. Also, I have a method for X, and it just outputs X, and a method for C, output C. So this is the basic setup I have. And let's see in action one more time. And I'll show you the output. So I can move. And you'll see the vector 2 input vector. Then space. I'm getting out one output for each press. Same thing for Z. And then X is I'm getting multiple. If I hold it down, it just keeps coming out. Same thing for C. And so that's how I have it set up so far. So now we're going to try to recreate this in a brand new scene. Alright, so here I have a brand new scene, and it's basically just that big cube as a ground plane. I'm going to add a capsule. This will be our player. Let's move them up a little bit. About 1.5. And we'll add a material to that player. And let's add a rigid body. Let's freeze the X and Z's so they don't fall over. First thing we need to do is add a player input component. So you have the capsule selected, go to player input, and here we have the player input component. Now we need to create the actions, and I have it in a separate folder. Let's call this input system 2 or input system 1, so we already have one for the last set. So we have input system 1, and then we can click that, and we have this with all the actions. So I want to move looking fire. Let's just set up a couple more like we did before for a couple of different keys. So let's add the C key. And normally what you would do is you would name this something like, I don't know, like heal or jump. I'm gonna keep it just to these letters so I can play around with the functionality. So I just have C and Z right now. Let's go ahead and add X. And then what I need to do is set up the binding. So this is set up to a button, which is fine. The binding, you can just do listen, and I'll press C and select that. And using control scheme, same thing with Z. Listen Z, oops, Z. And we'll set up this one too. Listen X. Okay. Keyboard. Okay. And you have to make sure you save your asset here. So save that input system, which is your input action asset. Okay, so that's saved. I'm not going to mess with this. Maybe a little complicated for me actually. So I've got that set up. Let's drag the input system 1 into the, oh, because you don't need to do that. Oh no, it goes here. It goes into this action slot there. And we'll leave all that there, default. Okay. So we've got the input system set up. Now we need to make our script. So let's select our capsule. Let's add a component. Let's add a new script. And let's call this player script 1. Since this is sample scene 1. So now we have our script. Let's open this. All right. And now we want to figure out how to set up the functionality to go with the actions in the player input. So let's open this up again. So we have that on the side. So we have move, look, fire, C, Z, and X. So let's set up methods for C, Z, and X. Keep it simple like we did in the last one. So void C. What you need to do also is have using Unity engine dot input system. Okay, so let's try this again. Void C. Void C. And what we need is let's reference back to this guy. Oh, it needs to be public. That's right, public void, and then input action callback context. So public void C. Input action dot context callback context. And so what this happens is whenever we press the C button, it's going to call this method, and it's also going to give us this context. So all we want to do is just debug C, so we know that's pressed. And let's do the same thing for Z and X. Okay, so Z. Let's do X. And for Z, let's do let's check the phase of it also. So if context dot started. So if it's in the started part of the phase, it will debug log the Z. So it's only going to give a Z when we press it, and it won't give us Z's as long as we hold it down. Whereas with the C and X, it's going to output the letters as long as we have it held down. So we've got that so far. All right, so once we have these set up in here in a script, we need to hook them up to our input actions. And we do that here in the component. So we need to select how we will send the handle the behaviors, and we're going to invoke Unity events. So we have our events, our player, and then these are all the player actions we set up here in our input system. So in our input action assets. So these right here are where we set up in our input action asset here. Okay, so go over to events, player, and we have the C, Z, and X set up. So add to the list, we'll grab this, stick that in there, which should give us access to player script 1. And this is C. And now we have for Z, same deal. Let's grab that. And player script 1 Z. And for X, do the same thing. Player script X. All right. Save that and let's see if that works so far. So press Z. Good. And each time I press, I only get it once. And holding down X, I think maybe there's a typo. And hold down C, and it keeps giving me C's. So I think that works pretty well. Let's check out if I have any typos. And C. All right. Well, I don't know what happened, but it's working now. Maybe I didn't save something or something didn't update. Anyways, it's working now. So now let's try to add the jump functionality. So let's go back into the script. And we're going to need to grab the rigid body. So set up a variable for that.
And then we'll grab a reference to component.
Okay. And then now we need to do a method for jump. So make it public, void jump, input action, dot callback context. And we're going to add force, vector 3. Actually, I don't remember how I did it. And I probably got this script from someone else. So for the jump, add force vector 3 up times 5f. So vector 3 up times 5f and force mode impulse. All right, perfect. And so we've got the method set up. Now we need to make sure the action is calling that method. So we're going back into our capsule, our player input component, come back to player, and then we have, we didn't add it into our input action asset. So let's do that. So we need to add a new action. Let's call this jump. And set to button. And the binding is keyboard. And let's listen, space. And there we go. Oops. And you have to make sure you save it. So let's save the asset. All right. So now let's go back into the player input component and events, player. And now we should see jump somewhere. There it is. So we'll add an action to that, or add an event to that, and then we'll have it go there. And then it'll go to jump. All right. And let's see. All right. It works. And you'll notice that if I hold it down, it keeps on jumping because I didn't set the phase. Well, no, actually it doesn't keep on jumping. It just jumps a couple times. Let's debug that and see what comes out. So let's see what happens. It should just come up like 3 times. I think that's what it did before for the other keys. Yeah, each time I press I get 2 or 3 callbacks. And if we wanted to just jump one time, we can do the same thing we did with the others. So if context got started.
If context got started, so if in the start phase of the press, then we'll have
A jump. So that's good. So let's go on to our move function. Public void. There we go. And we need to set up a speed for this. Float speed. Cool. Let's do 20. And then we're going to set up a fix update to handle the movement. Fixed update. Okay. So here we're going to get the input from the input system. So here's the thing with this kind of input. It's a little bit different than the buttons. Go over here to the input system. We'll look at the move. And you'll notice that it has it's an action type of value and control type of vector 2. And we'll look at this. So the WASD keys are composite type 2D vector, mode, digital normalized. And I guess this is the composite part of it for each binding. It gives a different composite part, and then it all comes out into this 2D vector. I'm not exactly sure how they set that up. I'll probably look into that later, but all you need to know for now that it's a 2D vector, vector 2 control type. So we've got that, and so let's set up our function over here, or set up our method here. So first we're going to need a vector 2 for the vector we're getting over here. So vector 2 input vector. So whenever we move, we're going to get this context from that. And so we're going to set our input vector to whatever we get here in the context. So input vector is equal to context dot, and I think it's a, what's it, read value? Read value. And let's see how I set it up actually. Read value. Read value type vector 2. So vector 2. So every time we move, we're going to get this input vector from the input system. And so what we're going to do is take this input vector and use that to move the rigid body. So do rigid body dot add force, and let's check to see how we have this set up before. So here's that, and add force, new vector 3, input vector x, 0 input vector y, times speed, force mode. All right. So new vector 3, input vector dot x for the x, 0, and then we're going to take the input vector dot y for the z, And we're going to multiply that times the speed. And then we're going to have the force mode, not impulse. You do that as force. All right, and that should handle the movement. Oh, actually, one more thing. We have to hook that up over here in our player input component. So then go down to events, player, and then move. And we'll add the event here. And then drag in the capsule. And then player script 1, move. All right. So what's going to happen is whenever we move, we're going to call this method. We're going to send it the callback context. And then the callback context is going to be used to set the value of the input vector variable. And then that input vector variable is going to be used to add force to the rigid body. All right. Let's set up our camera real quick. It's going to look at follow our capsule. And it's going to look at the capsule. And let's press play. And here we go. And I'm using the WASD keys. Pressing the space bar. Pressing X, or Z, X, and C. All right, so we got our basic player controller set up using the new input system. Hopefully that helped, and see you next time.